Chinese government organizing its own little side trip ahead of this state visit and sort of undermining the White House as the White House is considering sanctions on Chinese businesses for hack attacks.
I actually think it's a smart move, and I don't know to what extent they're undermining the White House. I'm sure the White House has been made well aware of what's going on. Xi Jinping was coming in the Pacific direction, and I know it's well known that the Chinese have been sort of obsessed about the choreography, not just of the state visit to Washington and the visit here to New York, but also what would be the other city, the other non-governmental, non-bilateral venue they'd have. And Seattle's an interesting choice. I mean, you went through the guest list there. I'm sure we'll be learning more about others that he'll be seeing. But it's, nobody on that list is likely to say no to a Chinese president. And, this is a relationship right now, the U.S.-China relationship, that is in need of some, should we say, win-wins at the summit. And I suspect they were looking for something that would be business-friendly, friendly generally to the Chinese, more so than the Washington visit may be. And I think it's a smart move.
Yeah. It's interesting, Gordon. Would you agree that there's no undermining going on here? Because as I understand it, some folks in Washington aren't too happy about this. And I wonder, obviously Facebook is blocked in China. Google decided to leave the country. What do they actually have to gain from meeting with the Chinese president?
Well, first of all, they do not want to turn this down, as you just heard. But also, of course, they're undermining the Obama administration, because it's been very well known, because the Obama administration has leaked that they want to impose sanctions on Chinese companies for receiving information that they use for commercial purposes. And Beijing, first of all, wants to make sure those sanctions are not put in place. But also, I think that they want to recreate the China business lobby, because that has fallen on hard times given all the events over the last 3 or 4 years. So, yes, of course, it's undermining the Obama administration. That's why they're doing it.
So, Tom, what would you single out as the most important issues on the agenda between not only President Obama and President Xi, but President Xi and, for example, Tim Cook or Mark Zuckerberg?
Well, those are two very different questions. I think when you look at the U.S.-China relationship, you're looking at the problem spots and you're looking at the areas where they've got to try to find some accommodation. The problem spots is a long list right now. Gordon just mentioned some huge issues that, by the way, I think the administration shares with a lot of those business people. And I suspect, although it may be a nice public relations looking thing in Seattle on the public face, the Chinese are going to get an earful from some of those same business people. And it isn't, by the way, just, I think, the high-tech CEOs who you mentioned. He will be meeting a lot of other high-level business people. I think Warren Buffett is going to be there. But so there's that. There's a lot, there's cyber. There's all sorts of issues that have been on the table for a while. Access to markets, IPR, intellectual property issues. But then, in terms of common ground, I think one to watch, and it may have a place actually both in Seattle on the tech front and also in Washington, maybe even here in New York at the UN, has to do with climate change. That is one of the few areas where the two governments have some common ground, where there's been some positive and constructive engagement. I think you can look to hear some statements about that issue on the way out.
And quickly, Gordon, the Journal reporting that President Xi is also going to be having dinner with Bill Gates at his house. What do you make of Gates's special access here?
Well, Gates has had special access for a long time, but that hasn't prevented Microsoft from having very severe problems in China. And actually, I think the same thing's going to happen to Tim Cook. Cook has said some really nice things to Jim Cramer about the strength of the Chinese economy, but it's not going to help Apple, which now has a tax case against it. And, basically they're supporting Huawei, the Apple competitor. So I don't think this is going to be an easy ride for any U.S. company, especially Apple and Microsoft.
Though we should mention that Apple has made huge headway in China, getting the last big carrier, China Mobile, on for the iPhone. The iPhone it is huge in China, though certainly, as you mentioned, Gordon, not without challenges. Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China, and Tom Nagorski, Executive Vice President of the Asia Society. We will be watching this visit very closely.